Hi, I'm Jonathan Treussard, and welcome to Treussard Talks, where we talk about the mechanics of investing, the psychology of investing, and what it means to manage your wealth with purpose. Because understanding your wealth shouldn't be as complex as building it. Welcome to today's show. Paul Solman, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show today. I'm going to do a quick intro, and then I really want to get into it and hear about your life, about the way you're thinking about the world today. But let me start at the top. You have been on television for 50 years. You are a longtime business and economics correspondent on the PBS NewsHour. You've been there since 1985. You are the creator of Making Sense. And along the way, you've earned, I believe this is correct, even though it's almost hard to believe, 8 Emmys, 5 Peabodys, a Loeb Award, and a James Beard Award.
Not for cooking.
I figured, though that would be pretty cool too. You got your education from Brandeis and HBS. You've taught and lectured at places like Harvard Business School and Yale and West Point. Your career is incredible, but I really want to start at the top. And I want to hear about your family, your parents, and how all of your experiences growing up have shaped your curiosity, your standards, your voice as a journalist. But one of the things that I was rediscovering about your dad when I was preparing for this conversation is that he was born in, and I quote, the Russian Empire. So take me to the top, Paul Solman.
He was born in Vitebsk, which was, I think, significantly Jewish town in what's now Belarus, White Russia. Also the town from which a number of artists came. Mark Chagall comes from Vitebsk. Malevich, the white-on-white guy, Russian suprematist of the 1920s, and Joseph Solman, among others. My mother came from the Ukraine. My father escaped with the family in 1912, was AWOL from the army and ran through the Pripyat marshes. My father was left behind at one point, 3 years of age, and some defecting soldier went back and got him. Otherwise, I would not be here. That's for sure. My mother left in 23 under the auspices of the government. This is before Stalin starts changing the nature of the Soviet Union. My grandfather was a revolutionary in the 1905 revolution after the Russo-Japanese War. I'm bald like him, and he had a big crease right here in his head from where he'd been clobbered during a jailbreak of other revolutionaries in 1905 or so. And then he was in the provisional government, the Kerensky government in 1917 before the Bolshevik Revolution, but he was still in good graces, and they were allowed to leave to go to America in 1923. Everything I am, and I fervently believe this, comes from my genetic inheritance and the fact that my parents were extremely loving. 2 weeks after I was born, I had a 3-year-old sister who was run into and killed by a milk truck. This was, of course, a huge family tragedy till the end of both of my parents' lives. My father lived till 99, my mother until 90. She got Parkinson's when she was 86. Well, that's when it manifested itself. But in any case, for years when I was in psychotherapy, I would complain about the fact that my mother and grandmother were living vicariously through me. And then I had a great epiphany that it was exactly the opposite. And instead of complaining about this, I should realize, and I have ever since realized in many decades, that there were 3 people in the world who thought I was the most important thing there was. Me, my mother, and my grandmother. Once I worked through my version of that, feeling guilty about my sister's death, that was back in 1988, went through a mini depression as a result, but have come out the other side. And ever since you've known me, certainly being one of the more content, happy, friendly, loving people you'll run into with an unbelievably fortunate career. I'm in my office here. This is where I broadcast from and stuff. And up there I have a handwritten note from my father in 1999. So he was already 90. We were talking about my job, and he said, "What about your hours?" I wrote it down at the time. "You are absurdly fortunate." That's my father talking about my job. He was completely correct, and I'm still doing it at age 81.
And your family, when you were born, your family was in New York?
Hartford, Connecticut. My father was on the so-called WPA, the Works Progress Administration of the Franklin Roosevelt, part of the New Deal, supporting artists, every artist you've heard of from that period, including artists with whom my father started a group. Mark Rothko, his name was Marcus Rothkowitz at the time. This is in 1935. We're all on the WPA, $26 a week to just create art. And then when the war started, my father was moved to Connecticut to do three-dimensional drawings for people in factories who'd never worked in factories before. Connecticut was the hotbed of the weapons industry, particularly helicopters and various other weaponry. And he would draw pictures so people knew how to put parts together three-dimensionally rather than have to read blueprints. We were in Hartford, Connecticut at that point. That's where in 1944, in the fall, I was born. My sister was almost 3. Then a milk truck backed out of our driveway. She had run into the driveway, was killed instantly.
It was in front of your house?
Yeah, on one side of the house.
Wow. And this is a house that you stayed in for a long time, which I can
No.
imagine.
No, they moved right back to New York City to be near my mother's parents, where several of her other siblings lived in a very nice middle-class housing project between the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges just on the East River called Knickerbocker Village, kind of a left-wing Jewish hotbed. This is 1945 that they would have moved in. Then we moved to 10th Street and 2nd Avenue, a nondescript apartment, which then became the East Village. So it turned out to be a very cool place.
Obviously, your father was an artist. Your mother clearly had a huge impact on your life, given that, she loved you so much.
And she was my mother.
And she was your mother, which is a good place to start. What would you say they taught you, and how does that show up in your work?
Well, I'd say it's the genetic heritage more than what they taught me, because I just feel I'm reading a book now. It's not right in front of me here, but a book by a famous neuroscientist, primatologist named Robert Sapolsky at Stanford, which is just an argument against why there is no such thing as free will. And I'm very persuaded by it. So really, it's what's my endowment? And the endowment is significantly genetic. And on my mother's side, it's being a kind of an anxious, agitated person, which has served me well. So, although it's uncomfortable at times, for sure. And my father, who was the baby of his family, a third of 3 kids, and who was just adored by everybody. So maybe he had more people who thought he was the most important person in the world than even I did, and had a tremendously equable temperament and very positive view of the world and of his place in it. And that's a large part of my personality. And my sister is even better. She's even happier than I am. She's unbelievable. She's a couple of years younger because she was like the reincarnation of the sister who got run over. So for her, it was really, she was like a total blessing and feels that way about herself. Anyway, so it's mainly genetic, but then the parents were very loving and made me feel worthy. And one of the most important distinctions I've seen among people I know is the distinction between the people who were brought up to feel, who were loved, who were wanted, and people who were not brought up that way. And that seems to me an indelible, maybe not insurmountable obstacle. That is, if you were brought up feeling you weren't worthy, but a tremendous hurdle and a huge distinction between people. I was brought up to feel I was worthy for sure. And then also my father was a very inquisitive person. My mother, and both of them were very mentally alert, able, and lived a long time and stayed that way and were intellectually engaged. I'm sure I'm that way because of them. And that endowment, both their nature, the genetic and nurture, the fact that the house was filled with books and reading all the time and going to museums from the time I was a little kid. I go to museums. I was at 5 museums in 6 days about a week ago. It's not to prove anything. It's just because I feel really comfortable there and really enjoy it. So I think all of it is a function of that set of endowments, both pure and nature. Inquisitiveness is one of them, and that's my whole career. I just saw back in the 1970s that this was something I knew nothing about. I spent a year at the Harvard Business School, as you mentioned. I was on a journalism fellowship, I thought I should learn something about business and economics because I knew squat about it. And nobody I knew anything about it. And I was sort of fascinated by it. I wanted to get into television. And a guy in the same journalism program was at Harvard who did television. He said, with stories like this, I brought him to the business school. I know how to do television. I said, gee, I'd love to do that. And that's really the entire genesis of my career, which is also pure luck.
Thanks for listening. I'm Jonathan Treussard, founder of Treussard Capital Management. I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you'd like to start receiving my free newsletter, Wealth Empowered, or if you'd like to learn more about me and Treussard Capital Management, go to Treussard.com. That's TREUSSARD.com. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the episode. You zeroed in on economics and finance in a way that perhaps didn't feel predestined, but that's, and so what's interesting to me, again, is I'm going to force a label on you and you get to push back, tell me how it doesn't fit. But fundamentally, one of the things that I, truly admire about you is, look, you're an intellectual who really could have been an academic, and you chose to go for practical clarity. You chose to go for something that is relevant in the world as opposed to an abstraction. And so you chose to be a translator. Is that fair?
Yeah, but I think that was also a natural inclination. I think I would have been a crummy academic. I don't know if you'd call it ADHD, or whatever, but I'm interested in learning a lot of things and moving on. And to have been an academic the way you have been, and then you've translated your life into being more useful to people than to simply being an academic. But you went through the PhD program after all, and so you know what it's like. And I don't think I am temperamentally well suited. Meanwhile, I love to talk, as you can see. I love to explain things, as anybody who's ever watched me on TV would know, as you certainly know. I love to engage in ideas. And so it just turned out the journalism was great for that. But journalism, print journalism, I was an editor, then I was a writer. I didn't want to be an editor because I didn't want that responsibility. Writing was lonely. TV you do with other people, and that's really the whole story. And I was lucky enough to pick an area that was just becoming interesting to everybody else. Remember, for those who are younger, I will tell you that in the 1950s, 1960s, start into the early 1970s, nobody in America worried about economics, business, finance. I mean, people who read the Wall Street Journal and Business Week, Forbes, Fortune cared about that stuff. And that were the same people. They subscribed to all four. And that was like, I don't know, 1 million people, maybe, something like that. And everybody else went, oh, who cares? And when I got out of college in 1966, the worst that could happen to you, if you were a good student as I was you would become a professor. I mean, you didn't ever, with kids today, what are you going to do? Is AI going to take all the jobs? Or how do you position yourself? 10 years ago, Coding Academy, I did stories about it. That was the answer. Now, can't get a job because coding gets done by chat, GPT. So anyway, the point is I lucked into, by temperament, by upbringing, by genetic endowment, and by being in the right place at the right time and having to pick something that then everybody went, oh, wow. And since I'm a pathological explainer and people wanted to have this stuff starting to be explained to them by about 1973 when the first oil crisis hit and there was inflation and nobody knew what hit them. And it happened again in the late 70s. And here I am, a guy who's taken that upon himself to try to learn all these things and then explain them. And that's what I'm doing as of today. I mean, literal.
Yeah. And again, I think to your point about the social aspect, the human aspect, I think one of the things that is really special in the way you do your reporting is you go into people's homes and there's something just fundamentally human about it. Pathological explainer genes now. And, as I think about our neck of the woods, and we understand that the world is a very broad place, but when I think about the things that, I worry about, I tend to organize my thinking in a simple matrix. And it's really about financial markets, the economy, where in a way I think financial markets really sit on top of the economy.
Yes.
And
Sure.
the economy sits on top of society. So I think financial markets, economy, society. And of course, because everything has a time dimension to it, I think of, well, what's right in front of us? What's the now question? And of course, what's the next 20-year question, next 30-year question, whatever it may be. The world changes rapidly. I used to think when people said things like, well, people are going to make a living driving Uber, I used to think, well, until the self-driving car. And that concerned me because it meant that there was a societal displacement that probably wasn't completely captured by the now. And of course, to your point about coding camps, 5-10 years ago, the answer was coding camps. And by the way, people paid good money for said activities. And forget the Uber driver being replaced by a self-driving car. The coding camp graduate might just be getting replaced very, very quickly, gone.
Oh.
So take me through that matrix. And again, I'm laying out the map. Now you get to take us on this adventure.
What's happening to the economy, tariffs, and over. I'm going to be disappointing to you, I think, in probably all 6 boxes of the matrix. It's a stochastic universe. It's a probabilistic universe. It's a chaotic universe. Chaos in the sense of chaos theory, which I only vaguely understand, much less explain, but it's too many variables. If people have ever read the science fiction trilogy, The Three-Body Problem, or know about the three-body problem, you know the of telling where any one of 3 bodies is going to be once they've already gotten into motion because of the forces that are generated by the orbits that they go on are basically indeterminable. And that's when I think about the economy, whether it's even just the U.S. economy, which is 330 million moving parts, changing their mind all the time, and all the neurons that are going on to within those 330 million heads. I just think one has to be agnostic with respect to the ability to say what's going to happen next. That is the next minute with regard to the market, any given market. Everybody knows there are multiple markets. You go on and on and on to markets you never even heard of, whether it's collateralized this or, securities for this, that, the other, and they're happening all the time. New markets are being created all the time. Think of NFTs. Think of, all the cryptos being created every day. There's some amazing number.
When the cost of launch is de minimis, and, we're talking about basically unregulated security issuance, where you get to stake yourself as a 100% shareholder and then see if there's a market.
Yep.
Presumably, you're going to do a lot of that. There are activities that have a true cost of execution, and that cost can be high or low. And presumably launching a new crypto, we could probably have the Treussard Talks coin before I finished the next sentence. So that, there's that part of it. And then, of course,
if you have enough viewers, at the point at which you have enough viewers, and we say just what you just said, we don't even have to do the coin, there'd be people out there poised to buy the Treussard Talks coin. Yes. But
so there's the private cost of activity, then there's the societal cost of things. And I think that's a really good way to organize your thinking. On the one hand, there's extraordinarily cheap things to do that may or may not have positive or negative societal externalities. And then there are kind of expensive activities, presumably running a private credit endeavor, a fund, isn't cheap. You got to get the spiffy office space and get the docs in order, and attorneys are involved and all of that.
Yes.
And here we are again, constantly asking the question of, hey, this concept of equilibrium, right? Which is, are we doing enough of it? Are we doing too little?
Again, all of this conversation is now, it was a tributary of the larger point. My larger point was, we've got a 3-body problem. I guess that's the way I'd now, for the moment, characterize it. What historians do, and journalists on a shorter leash, why did what happened happen? And you come up with a story. It might be a just so story. That is a story that really fits, but doesn't tell you anything. It might be a story that contains a deeper truth, at least in the minds of enough people who are thoughtful that it could qualify for that phrase, that description as a deep truth. But since I'm skeptical enough of the stories in retrospect, what would have happened had the Civil War, had they shot on Fort Sumter, and therefore I think, was that ever possible? And so even that is to say, things that already happened, there's no way to claim that your version of why it happened is incontestable. Now you're asking, perfectly reasonably, since that's what we're all worried about, what's gonna happen? I go, shit, fucking idea. Pardon my English.
No, and I think that's exactly right.
So then, wait a second, do you just throw up your hands, hide under the bed? No, come up with a set of strategies which protect yourself as best you can. Does that mean get a gun, for example? Well, no, I think the externalities of having a gun with 7 grandchildren are such that I'm not doing. What about a generator? I'm not even talking now about financial stuff, right? Obviously, but more, the most basic kind of survival stuff. Laying in stores of water or chlorine to take the water out of there's a cove right in front of our house or behind our house, but you'd have to purify the water. As you can tell, it would hardly come trippingly off the tongue if I hadn't thought about it before. But I go, just like every decision, and this is the profundity of economics. The profundity of economics is that it is life. All economics is about decision making. I always have it here. It's costs and benefits. If you want the benefits to outweigh the costs, are they doing so now? Yes.
Pretty close to equilibrium.
And there's a Vermeer of a woman on the scales, and behind her there is the Last Judgment, painting the Last Judgment. So it's all the way up to and including, are you doing the right thing in life so that you get eternal life, if you believe in that sort of thing. For me, that's what economics is. And then with every decision, like, am I going to buy a generator, or am I going to buy a gun, or am I going to buy chlorine pills? It's, well, what are the current costs, which are easier to certainly calculate? How much is a gun going to cost, or the chlorine tablets, and where am I going to put them, and so forth, versus what are the benefits? But then you have to, so that's current costs. The current benefits are nil. But then you have to do the prospective costs and benefits. And then,
in a world of uncertainty,
yes,
part of it is the unintended consequences of your actions, to your point.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly right. The people that are in the business of predicting are missing the point, which is the real name of the game is, to the extent you can, avoid truly extraordinary damage along the way.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
If you can just look mostly prepared most of the time, you're looking pretty good. And I say to people, I sincerely believe that thought is not dangerous. However scary the thought, engage with it and see where it takes you, right? So that's to your point. You're willing to stare at the cove and say, hey, there might be a state of the world in which I'm drinking this thing. That's not my ideal state of the world. That's not where I'd prefer to spend my time. But hey, it's a place. Can we talk about it? So that makes a lot of sense to me. But to not predict the terminus on this train ride, but rather say, what could it look like? Would we be okay as people, as a household, as a society, as a species? All of that can be very, very helpful.
I live my life day to day, moment to moment, by trying to maximize my own what I get out of it, which has a positive externality in that the way I do it is something that pleases other people. So I treat no one any differently than anybody else, whether it's the head of the World Bank or a janitor or a mendicant for that matter. Whether or not I give the person money, I'm always making eye contact, saying something nice or friendly or a joke. And that's a positive feedback loop without exception. But in general, just get the most you can out of every moment that you're alive, because it's such a vanishingly short period of time. And it's so improbable that you would ever be here, you or me, or your lovely wife, Mariah, or the kids, or my kids, or grandkids, whatever. So, and that is how I air myself going forward. And then, as you say, I certainly think about, okay, suppose there's hyperinflation, how well am I protected against that? Now, getting more into your field. There's a stock market crash. How well am I defended? How, and and all the way up to and including tax implications and things like that. If it's a small enough difference, and by small enough, I mean, in my case, maybe a few $1,000s, let's say, then I go, screw it. I'm not going to worry about it. The transaction cost of thinking about it and what you would have to do as a result is too high. Not worth it. Too little time left. Too few weekends, as my wife puts it. So those, forget about it. Bigger things, people coming down the cove to attack our houses, that I think about and then decide, no, it's the prospective costs are greater than the prospective benefits.
I think that's right. There is magnitude and probability, and you're constantly trading off those two as you're thinking through this. I wanted to go back to what you do professionally as a journalist. And look, you've been at it for 50 years. I'd love to hear, is there a story that you feel you can tell now that you couldn't earlier? Is there a way that you have an ability to capture the essential truth, the essential part of a story in a way that you couldn't earlier in your career?
Probably every day that would be true to some, epsilon extent, tiniest number. That is, it's a cumulative process with the proviso or the asterisk that I'm also forgetting stuff. And I have to reread to stay even where I was, right? So in the sense that I'm staying as informed as I can about new tokens or coins, like we were talking about the Treussard Solman token, or how to use...
By the way, it will be soon available for $14.99 plus shipping and handling.
Excellent. Well, you take care of that stuff. Again, the transaction cost is too high for me to worry. I do have a piece of advice for people whom the world is upsetting too much these days. Okay, I have 4 pieces of advice for that. I only give advice about things that I do. I mean, the advice is something I follow, whether it would be portfolio advice or anything else. I say, here's my portfolio, like our friend Terry Burnham. So 4 things I do is I know I worked for television now for 50 years, but I do not watch news on television or listen to it on radio because I know my amygdala is that is the part of the brain that's the lizard brain, the earliest part of the brain that is involved with emotions. And I know it's too vulnerable to the stimuli that are presented by the electronic media. And my amygdala is too vulnerable for that. So I don't do that.
You dedicate yourself to social media for news. Just kidding.
Yeah. I subscribe to something cool. I subscribe to a number of different blogs. I read one every morning, news items by John Ellis, which I would recommend to anybody. $50 a year or something like that. And he reads everything at about 3 a.m. and everything I need. The New Scientist, the South Morning China News, the Times, the Post, and then gives you a little précis and then a link, although a lot of this stuff is behind paywalls. And so I read the Times, I read the Post, I read stuff in the Guardian, I read Financial Times, I read, things from the Economist. I pick and choose. There's no way in the world I could follow everything that's happening in the world. Some tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the total, but I try to keep up. And that then makes me more able, this is answering your question, to report on, understand, try to contextualize whatever it is that's happening that I'm covering, okay? Or would be asked to cover or would choose to cover. We've talked a lot about transactions cost here. One of the things that I worry about or I'm aware of that I think is a problem is the extent to which I'm wedded to what I already know. Because the transaction cost of giving up on stuff that I think I already know is so high.
The psychic pain of shedding ideas, shedding thought.
And the cost of learning the new alternative.
Yeah, I think that's a very healthy way to look at it. And let me try to make sure that I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly. There is the mechanical activation of the flight or fight kind of response. And to your point, if you're consuming in a blind way things that are designed to trigger an emotional response, because an emotional response can then be channeled into a commercial output of some sort, including just staying tuned for the next commercial break. You're no longer the agent, you're the product in an odd way, as opposed to being the inquisitive, self-directed agent that says, hey, there's this thing out there, and by the way, I don't care for it. It makes me feel really icky. But as a student of the world, I'm going to look at it, not to be triggered, but more to actually see what there is to learn.
Yes, that's right. But to a point, because, you only have so much time, as well as so much emotional energy. So I do that to protect myself. I say to myself, as every religious tradition tells you, be here now, be in the moment. Don't be thinking about those 6 boxes in the matrix. Just be present. That's part of the being friendly to everybody and connecting with them and so forth. And then the new one, for the moment, I can't remember what the third one is. It'll come to me probably. But the new one, new in the sense this was just a friend of mine who was talking to me about this not too long ago, and is to think his thought that there's more good in the world than bad. And that small acts of human kindness are getting together for lunch. Me saying to you before we got on, to pass along to our mutual friend, or your father-in-law, and my friend Peabodys, the economist at Brandeis University, whom I had lunch with, was saying he ought to have been considered for the Nobel Prize. That all of those things, that's good. Those are goods in the world, and they ought to be cultivated, or as best one can. You ought to be able to be it would be good if I can convince you or anybody who's watching or listening that that is the case, and that they ought to act. And by telling you all that, trying to infect your subconscious to act accordingly.
No, I think that's exactly right. My wife, and again, I think there's a trade-off. You never want to say something that is disingenuous, but no. I think my wife has often encouraged me, when you have when you have something nice to say, or a compliment, or just a positive thought, to share it with that person, because it is fundamentally a gift, even if it's a stranger, that you're, crossing on the street. I mean, if there's something where you're like, that's cool, then share that, because it does propel goodness forward. And look, I know there's one thing that I want to hear about, and I want to hear from you before we close. And I do have a set of very important rapid fire questions I want to close with. But before we get to that, I know you've been engaged in this nonprofit that aims to really crossbreed empathy and understanding, and hopefully a sense of togetherness, really. So tell me about that.
Yes. Now I'm going to say it slowly so that people can take it down for anybody who's watching or listening. It's called the American Exchange Project. American Exchange Project. I'm going to keep using the phrase. You can just put it into Google and it'll come right up to get you to our website. This is from about 7 years ago. Former student of mine came to me, said, what should I do with my life? He could have gone to Wall Street. He could have got the consulting, whatever. He's the grandson of the well-known American historian, now late historian, David McCullough. His name is David McCullough also. And we hatched this plot. And the plot is a domestic foreign exchange program. So it's strictly within America. We send high school seniors right after they graduate to live for a week in a community entirely different than their own, live with a family or live in a group in an Airbnb or something, and then to host kids from all over the country in their community for a week. We've been at it for summer. Comes right after you graduate for kids. It varies because in New York, summer starts later. Kids don't graduate until later in June. But it's over the first 7 weeks of the summer. So 4 weeks in June, 4.5 weeks in June, 3.5 weeks in July. So maybe over 8-week period. And it's magic. Not to say that we really understood that it was going to be magic, but because kids being on their phone, being isolated, living in a bubble, feeling that way wherever they are, And our communities we were in 60 this summer. We'll be in 80 or 90 this next coming summer. Groups go no more than 10 kids at a time. Kids from everywhere. So it's not, you don't go with friends or anything like that. It's whether you're in Palo Alto or Kilgore, Texas, or the Bronx, New York, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Jackson, Mississippi, or Anchorage, Alaska, or Sheridan, Wyoming, or Ennis, Montana, or Flandreau, South Dakota, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Portland, Maine, a couple of places here in Massachusetts. The reason I keep saying the American Exchange Project is that any of you can go to the website, you can read all about it. You should watch the CBS Sunday Morning piece about us, which is, I think, the best of them, 9 minutes long. But there's a whole bunch of coverage from newspapers and TV shows, Fox and Friends and so forth. It's totally bipartisan. We have money from Steven Spielberg and the Koch brothers. And we're all about kids seeing the other America. America, go to Texas if you're from New York. Go to New York if you're from Texas, and so forth. It's speaking to such a need, such a yearning that we had not anticipated. I mean, since we started a bunch of years ago, things were not as they are now. We were not as polarized as we are now. The idea of befriending people who are unlike yourself is just so powerful. When we surveyed the 550 kids, we got 440 back or something. This was this past summer. We've done 1,500 kids so far, 550 last summer. And of those 440 or so who responded, would you recommend it to a friend? 100%. Average, 1 to 10, how enthusiastically? 9.7. So it's transformative for a lot of these people. Many of them have never been on a plane before in their lives. They've certainly not been on a plane alone. It's the first time they're out of the house and taking the first step towards the job, the military, their college, whatever it is. And so we want it to be like the high school prom. We want every kid in America to do it. So please, to everybody who may be listening or hearing about this or watching, please think of a high school teacher. We pay the teacher about $8,000 on average. Teacher's job is to recruit kids, get them to go, and then to manage the week in that town, including trying to find us places for the kids to stay, families who will recruit. It's win-win-win. Everybody loves it. The families love it. The kids love it. They cry at the end of the week because they're going to miss each other so much. And so, yes, that's what I'm doing to try to further the kind of positive feedback loop that I think any community or society or civilization needs in order to sustain itself.
That seems like such a fundamental antidote to looking at someone who fundamentally is part of the us and not think of them as them. And I think that's brilliant.
We're all Americans and we have more in common than divides us, for sure. And when I said that at the Lions Club in dark red Kilgore, Texas, every person in the audience was nodding. After I had sung with them My Country 'Tis of Thee and pledged allegiance to the flag of Texas. And I said,
all right, the next section we might be able to do in French, but I think that'd be exclusionary, so we're going to do it in English. But as you know, I was born and raised in Paris. I used to watch this amazing TV show, the PBS equivalent in France. And Pivot would ask the same questions to every one of his guests, often book authors, critics, so on and so forth. You might recognize the question because they were translated to American TV by James Lipton for Inside the Actor's Studio.
I used to watch that.
So are you ready for some quick questions?
Yeah, but if it's going to be rapid fire, I can't do it in French.
What is your favorite word?
My favorite word, love.
What is your least favorite word?
Hate.
What is your favorite drug?
Percocet.
What sound or noise do you love?
Music, probably Bach.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Chalk on a blackboard.
What is your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
Who would you like to see on a new banknote?
A new banknote from Harriet Tubman?
What profession, other than your own, would you never, ever want to attempt?
Almost all of them. That's
if you were reincarnated, I believe it. And I think your body of work suggests you've made a very good decision. If you were reincarnated as a plant or an animal, what would it be?
That's tough. A dog, I guess.
One last question. Are you ready? If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Just kidding.
Well, Paul Solman, this was an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the reporting you've been doing for the last 50 years. Thank you for your generosity of spirit, your humanity, and on a personal note, thank you for your friendship.
And thank you for yours. Give my love to Mariah and to Tzvi.
This podcast is for entertainment and education only. Nothing here is financial advice. Treussard Capital Management is a registered investment advisor. Please visit our website, .treussard.com, for additional information and disclaimers.